Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The question hung in the air, though no one asked it aloud. The room buzzed with urgency, screens alive with tactical overlays, voices clipped and sharp. SEALs in dark uniforms leaned over maps, their hands tracing invisible lines of war. The walls trembled with the low hum of servers and the occasional burst of static from encrypted radios. But in the far corner, where the mop bucket rested quietly against the wall, she stood unseen. Her name was Anna. No one used it, not here. To them she was ma'am, or more often, out of the way. A janitor in her 60s, bent but steady, her hands toughened from decades of work. She carried herself with a quiet patience, moving between floors and corridors as though time had slowed around her. The elite operators of Naval Special Warfare Development Group barely noticed. They brushed past her, their clipped boots swallowing her silence, their eyes fixed on missions that stretched beyond oceans. To them, she was part of the building, as unremarkable as a door frame, as replaceable as a light bulb. But she noticed everything. Every conversation that cut off when the commander entered, every frustration hidden in a clenched jaw, every coffee stain spreading across a mission folder. It was her world just as much as theirs. She just played a different role. That morning, Lieutenant Commander Alex Thorne made sure she felt it. "Just get out of the way, old woman. This is a restricted area." The words snapped like a whip across the sterile quiet. He hadn't even looked at her, his gaze fixed on the tactical map projected across the screen. The command room lights washed his face in sterile blue, sharp lines highlighting youth, confidence, and the arrogance of someone who'd always been listened to. Anna said nothing. She never did. She simply adjusted the mop handle in her palm, rolled her cart a few feet to the side, and continued. Her silence infuriated Thorne. He thrived in control, in obedience, in the rhythm of command and response. Yet here was a woman who acknowledged him without deference, without fear. Her composure was too calm, too still. To him it was weakness, or worse, disrespect. He mistook humility for insignificance. Others did too. The SEALs were polite in the mechanical way men were polite when hierarchy demanded it, but no one saw her. They didn't ask her name, or where she was from, or why she had the kind of security clearance that let her mop floors a stone's throw from rooms filled with live feeds from half the world. She didn't correct them. She had long ago learned that invisibility was its own kind of shield. Yet something was shifting on the base. For weeks tension had simmered beneath the surface. Intelligence chatter whispered of an internal threat, a hand inside their walls. Security tightened, drills doubled, and for a man like Thorne, young, hungry, sharp, it was fuel. He thrived in the fire, orchestrating response scenarios with brutal precision, barking orders that cracked like thunder. He was being watched, judged, groomed. Every drill, every briefing was another step toward his own legend. And then there was Anna, always there, cart squeaking, cloth ringing, slow movements carving a rhythm into the frantic tempo of war. To Thorne, she was an anomaly. To the men, she was invisible. To herself, she was simply working. But she knew better, she always had. That Tuesday morning should have been like any other. A bucket of murky water, the smell of disinfectant, boots tracking mud from the training yards. Nothing remarkable. But she felt it in the air, something unspoken, vibrating beneath the surface of the day. The alarms confirmed it. A shrill wail tore through the halls, red lights flashing against steel. The building shifted into chaos. Sirens blared, radios erupted. Drills were nothing new here, but this one carried an edge sharper than usual. The SEAL teams poured through corridors, weapons tight against their chests, voices like thunder rolling against the walls. Controlled chaos, method in madness. Anna found herself caught in it. She had been cleaning an administrative office, tucked neatly beside the central command hub. The alarm locked the doors automatically, the security system sealing compartments. Her instructions for such an event were simple: stay put, shelter in place. So she did. She stood quietly in the corner, mop in hand, cart beside her, back to the wall, breathing slow, still, waiting. The door burst open. Thorne stormed in first, rifle low ready, eyes hard and sweeping. His team fanned out with crisp efficiency, clearing corners, checking shadows. Boots struck linoleum like hammers. They weren't looking for a janitor. They weren't expecting her. And yet there she was. Perfectly calm, perfectly still, exactly where she was supposed to be. To Thorne, running on adrenaline, she was a problem. Civilians were supposed to panic, to cry, to obey. She did none of that. Her stillness grated on him, felt like quiet defiance. "What are you doing here?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the noise. "This is a lockdown. This area is sterile." Her gaze rose to meet his, steady, calm. "My instructions are to shelter in place, Lieutenant Commander." Her voice was soft, but it carried the kind of softness that somehow filled the room, demanding attention. No tremor, no fear. And that unsettled him more than panic would have. "Your instructions are irrelevant," he snapped, stepping closer, shadow towering over her. "You're a civilian in a restricted zone during a high-threat drill. You're a variable I can't account for. Who are you? What's your clearance code?" He expected hesitation, a stammer, an old woman fumbling with words. Instead, "Level 4. Thorne faltered, just a flicker, but it was there. Level 4 was rare, too rare. It meant access to nearly every corner of the base. He blinked it away, arrogance reasserting itself, probably a clerical oversight, a mistake buried in bureaucracy. He smirked. "Level 4 clearance doesn't mean anything to me right now." His voice dropped, mocking, cruel. "In my world we have call signs. They tell us who you are, what you've done, what you're capable of. So tell me, old woman, what's your call sign?" The room stilled. His men shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at one another. It was a cruel question, a mocking jab, a way of drawing blood without firing a shot. For the briefest moment her expression shifted. The quiet janitor fell away, replaced by something ancient, something formidable. Her eyes hardened. Her silence carried weight. When she spoke, it was not loud. It did not need to be. "Valkyrie." The name detonated in the air. It wasn't just a word. Not to Thorne, not to his men, not to anyone who'd ever heard the stories whispered in classified halls. Valkyrie wasn't a nickname. Valkyrie was a ghost story, a shadow, a prayer. And for the first time, Thorne felt small. He didn't understand why, not yet. But he felt it. A primal chill clawing at his chest, a realization that he had asked a question he did not understand and received an answer he could not bear. Outside, the alarm screamed. Inside, silence pressed against the walls. Anna Valkyrie did not look away. And in that silence, something in Thorne's carefully constructed world began to crack. How could a single word silence a room full of warriors? The name hung in the air like smoke, heavy, impossible to ignore. Valkyrie. Every man in the room froze, weapons lowering by instinct rather than command. Even the alarm sirens beyond the door seemed distant now, drowned out by the echo of that one word. Thorne blinked, his mouth open, but no words came. The smirk had fled, leaving only disbelief behind. He wanted to laugh it off, a joke, some absurd bluff. But the look in her eyes stopped him cold. Those weren't the eyes of a janitor. They weren't even the eyes of a civilian. They were eyes that had seen too much, carried too much, endured too much. His chest tightened. He had underestimated her. And for the first time in years, fear stirred inside him. The door creaked. "Did I hear you correctly, Lieutenant Commander?" The voice carried like a blade across the room. Authority without effort. Command without raising volume. Every man stiffened before the presence in the doorway. Admiral Hayes. He stepped inside, the weight of his ribbons and years trailing behind him like a cloak. His face was granite, hard lines carved by decades of battle and bureaucracy. Yet his eyes betrayed something else. Disbelief, recognition, maybe even awe. They weren't locked on Thorne. They weren't sweeping the room for threats. They were locked on her. On it. On Valkyrie. Admiral, Thorne stammered, straightening. Relief surged for a moment. Surely Hayes would dismiss this absurdity, cut it down, restore order. Surely. But the Admiral didn't look at him. He didn't acknowledge the armed team standing rigid at attention. He walked slowly, deliberately, as though approaching something sacred. Colonel Schmidt, his voice cracked just slightly, betraying the tremor of memory long buried. Analyze Schmidt. The old woman gave a single, slow nod. Thorne's throat tightened. Colonel. Hayes let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for decades. His shoulders sagged under the weight of 30 years of silence, then straightened again, pride surging through his frame. His voice grew hard, ringing against steel walls. Gentlemen, you are standing in the presence of a living legend. The words cracked through the room like thunder. Thorne's men shifted, uncertain, eyes darting from the Admiral to the janitor they'd ignored for years. Confusion etched across their young faces. Hayes ignored them. His gaze never left her. You think you're elite, Hayes continued, voice rising. You think your tridents mark you as untouchable. This woman wrote the book you're barely qualified to read. The silence that followed was suffocating. Anna said nothing. She didn't need to. Thorne felt his pulse racing in his ears. He wanted to protest, to demand answers, but he was drowning in disbelief. The janitor, the ghost who pushed a cart through hallways while they passed her without a glance. She couldn't be Valkyrie. That was a myth, a story whispered in late-night bull sessions, half-jokingly, as if saying the name too loud would conjure a phantom. But Hayes believed it. He wasn't just saying the words. He was reverent. She ran networks so deep behind the Iron Curtain, the Admiral said, stepping closer to her, that even the Stasi believed she was one of their own. She walked into interrogation centers and walked out with secrets that shifted the balance of power. Once, she exfiltrated not just plans but the general guarding them. You don't understand, Valkyrie wasn't a code name. It was a prayer. Thorne's stomach churned. He felt small, exposed. The weight of his arrogance pressing down on him. He'd mocked her, ordered her, demanded her call sign. And she had given it. Hayes turned, his gaze sweeping the team, then pinning itself squarely on Thorne. You demanded her call sign, Lieutenant Commander. You have it, and now you will show the respect it deserves. Thorne's mouth went dry. His men were watching. The Admiral was watching, but most crushing of all, she was watching. Anna, the janitor, Valkyrie. For the first time in his life, Thorne had no words. Admiral Hayes took another step closer to her, his expression shifting, hard lines softening into something few men ever saw on his face. Gratitude. Deep, bone-deep gratitude. In 1983, he said, his voice quieter now, my ODA team was compromised in Nicaragua, pinned down, wounded, a company of Sandinistas closing in. Command told us no support was coming, to prepare for the worst. And then a new voice came through, calm, steady, a ghost on the radio. That voice guided us through terrain no map marked, coordinated assets we didn't even know existed. That voice saved my life, saved all my men, that voice. He swallowed hard, tears glinting in the corners of his weathered eyes. Belonged to Valkyrie. The weight of the words pressed into the walls, into the men, into Thorne's very bones. He turned back to Anna. We never knew who you were. Your file was sealed. They said you vanished after the wall fell, that Valkyrie was gone. Anna's eyes softened, world weariness shimmering behind them. She gave no answer. None was needed. And then Admiral Hayes, a four-star officer, a man decorated with more honors than most could name, straightened his spine, brought his hand up, and delivered a salute so crisp it cut the air. To her. To Valkyrie. The room froze. Every SEAL stared, their lungs caught mid-breath. Thorne felt the ground shift beneath him, the entire architecture of his world tilting. He had mocked her. He had towered over her. He had demanded respect from her. And now the most powerful man on the base, a living legend in his own right, was saluting her. Shame burned hot in Thorne's chest. His arrogance shriveled, his pride shattered. For the first time in years he felt small. The Admiral lowered his hand, his gaze snapping back to Thorne, cold, piercing. "You demanded her call sign, Lieutenant Commander," he said, his tone like ice. "Now you will show the respect that is due." Every eye turned to Thorne. His mouth worked, but no sound came. He wanted to sink into the floor. His entire body trembled, though he forced himself forward, step by heavy step, until he stood before her. He couldn't meet her gaze, not yet. His eyes fixed on the worn floor tiles beneath his boots. His voice, when it came, was rough, strangled. "Colonel Schmidt, ma'am," his throat closed. "There are no words to express my disrespect. My behavior was unacceptable. I'm deeply sorry." For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips, sad, knowing, almost maternal. "The most dangerous enemy, Lieutenant Commander," she said softly, "is the one you underestimate." The words sliced through him, not with cruelty but with truth, a truth he could not escape. She nodded, accepting his apology with a quiet dignity that humbled him more than any punishment could. Silence held the room. Then Admiral Hayes spoke again, his voice softer now, reverent. "Young men chase glory, but legends hide in plain sight." Anna lowered her eyes, returning to her cart as if the moment had passed. Her hands gripped the mop handle again, steady, unshaken, as if none of it had happened. But everything had changed. Why did the hallways sound different the next morning? Thorne couldn't explain it. The base was the same as it had always been. Boots striking linoleum, voices sharp with command, doors slamming as men moved between missions. And yet, everything had changed. The echoes carried something new now. Respect, awe, whispered reverence that traveled faster than orders ever could. Valkyrie. The word rippled through the barracks, passed from lips that scarcely believed it, growing in weight with every repetition. Some dismissed it as rumor at first, a wild story, exaggerated, impossible. But then the details emerged. A handful of operators who had stood in that room the night before spoke in low tones of Admiral Hayes's salute, of the old woman's calm, of the single word that silenced them all. They didn't embellish. They didn't need to. The truth was staggering enough. By mid-morning, the legend had spread across the entire compound. Men who had walked past Anna 1,000 times without seeing her now slowed when she appeared. They didn't speak to her, not yet, but they watched her differently, not with condescension, not with impatience, with something rawer, reverence. Anna noticed. She noticed everything. The sudden stillness when she entered the cafeteria. The way young men's eyes followed her mop bucket as though it were a flag being carried. She accepted it with the same quiet composure with which she had accepted their dismissal. She did not seek it. She did not need it. She simply worked. But Thorne couldn't let it rest. The shame clung to him like a second skin. He replayed the moment in his head over and over, his mocking sneer, his demand for a call sign, the silence after she answered. He had towered over her, tried to break her, and she had leveled him with a single word. Worse, she hadn't done it to humiliate him. She hadn't even raised her voice. That was the part that destroyed him. She hadn't needed to. He found himself avoiding her in the halls, ducking into rooms when he saw her cart, ears burning when others lowered their voices in her presence. But avoidance only deepened the wound. He couldn't escape the truth. He had mocked a giant. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake in the barracks, staring at the ceiling, hearing the whispers. Valkyrie, Valkyrie, Valkyrie. The word gnawed at him until he rose, pulled on a sweatshirt, and wandered the quiet corridors. The base after hours was different, stripped of its thunder, filled only with the hum of electricity and the occasional clatter of distant boots. He ended up in the library. It was empty, as it often was. Shelves lined with volumes few men touched, histories, strategies, memoirs of wars long past. Dust softened their spines. He stood in the dim light, restless, until a sound at the far end caught him. The squeak of wheels, the whisper of cloth on wood. On it. She was polishing the long oak table that ran the length of the room, her movements slow, deliberate. The mop and bucket had been left at the door. Tonight it was only a rag in her hands. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't break her rhythm. Thorne froze, the weight of his guilt slamming into him. He wanted to retreat, but his legs held. "Colonel," he said finally, voice hoarse. She paused, not in surprise, in acknowledgement. She turned slightly, her face lined but steady, eyes patient. "Lieutenant Commander." The title cut him deeper than any insult could have. She spoke it without malice, without mockery, simply fact. He faltered, his throat burned. The apology he had given in front of Hayes felt shallow now, incomplete. "I don't deserve your time, but I need to ask." He stopped, searching for words, each one heavy. How did you become who you are?" Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment, then shifted back to the table, cloth moving again. The silence stretched until he thought she wouldn't answer at all. Finally, the world was different then. It wasn't a story, it was a beginning. She spoke in fragments, her voice low, steady. Not of missions or triumphs, not of secrets stolen or battles shifted, but of choices, hard ones, quiet ones. She told him of the first time she was underestimated, a young recruit dismissed as incapable, relegated to the margins. Of the day she realized invisibility could be power. Of the lives she saved not with weapons, but with patience, with silence, with watching what others missed. Thorne listened, breath shallow. She wasn't bragging, she wasn't even reminiscing. She was teaching. "The uniform," she said, "is not the measure of the person, nor the rank. It is what you carry in silence, what you're willing to give without ever being thanked." He swallowed hard. "I don't think I could do what you did." Anna looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes softened with something he hadn't expected, compassion. "No one thinks they can, until they must." The words struck him like a blow. They weren't instructions, they weren't comfort, they were truth, and truth carried more weight than any reprimand. He wanted to ask more, about East Germany, about Nicaragua, about the radio voice that had saved Hayes's men, but her silence told him those stories weren't his to take. Some legends remained locked away. Instead, he asked the only question he could. Why here? Why now? Why a janitor? She placed the rag neatly on the table, straightening it with worn fingers. Her shoulders seemed heavier suddenly, her posture sagging under years invisible to him. "Because peace is fragile," she said, "and some wounds never close. The work grounds me, keeps me human. After you've seen the world from its darkest angles, sometimes all you want is to clean a floor, to put something in order, to do a small thing well." He couldn't speak. His throat ached with the weight of her words. Anna gathered her rag, turned her cart, and paused at the doorway. For a heartbeat, she glanced back at him. "Lieutenant Commander," she said softly, "the heroes you look for aren't always the ones in the spotlight. Sometimes the greatest among us are the ones we never see." And then she was gone. Thorne stood alone in the library, the silence pressing down on him. He had come seeking answers, but what she had given him was something else entirely, perspective. The next day, whispers followed her still. But when Thorne saw her in the hallway pushing her cart, he didn't duck away. He didn't avoid her. He stopped. And for the first time, he stepped aside, giving her space. It wasn't enough. It never would be, but it was a beginning. What did she see when she closed her eyes? That question haunted Thorne. Days after their midnight conversation in the library, he couldn't shake it. She had spoken so little, offered only fragments, yet those fragments had unsettled the foundation of everything he thought he knew about strength. When she walked the halls now, no one dared dismiss her. Young operators who once shoved past without a glance slowed their stride. Some offered hesitant nods, others stiff-backed respect. But Anna, Colonel Annalise Schmidt, met each with the same quiet grace. She didn't bask in the reverence. She didn't reject it either. She simply kept moving. Yet beneath that calm, Thorne sensed something else: shadows. He saw it in the moments when her eyes lingered a beat too long on a news report flickering across the lounge television. When her hand paused over a mop handle, her gaze distant, as if chasing ghosts no one else could see. One afternoon, Thorne caught her in the supply room, organizing bottles of bleach and stacks of cloth. He hesitated at the door. "Ma'am," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" Her brow lifted slightly. "You may." "What do you see when you think back, when you think of Valkyrie?" For a long moment she said nothing. The silence was heavy enough to make him regret the question. But then she drew a slow breath, set down the bottle in her hand, and leaned against the shelf. Her eyes unfocused, her voice slipping into a tone not meant for him alone, more like she was speaking to the room itself. "I see snow." Her words carried him somewhere else entirely. The year was 1978, East Berlin. Snow drifted down in lazy flakes, softening the edges of a city built from concrete and fear. Anna was younger then, though even in her 20s she carried herself with the same composure she wore decades later. The world around her was gray: the walls, the uniforms, the faces of the guards who patrolled streets where no one smiled. She stood in the shadow of a bakery, scarf wrapped tight around her chin, a paper bag in her arms. To anyone passing, she was unremarkable. Another East German woman, tired and cold, carrying bread home to a family. But the bag was not filled with bread. Inside, a microfilm cylinder wrapped in wax paper held photographs of Soviet missile blueprints. The man who had slipped it to her minutes earlier had vanished into the alleys. He would not live to see another sunrise. He had known it, and so had she. A soldier approached. His boots crunched on snow, rifle slung loosely across his chest. He glanced at her, suspicion flickering for the briefest instant before fatting. Just a woman, just another face in the cold. He moved on. Her heartbeat never changed. Anna crossed the street, each step deliberate, unhurried. She disappeared into the warren of alleys, the snow swallowing her tracks. By nightfall, she had delivered the cylinder to a drop point. By dawn, it was in the hands of men who would carry it west. Entire strategies would shift. Borders would tremble. None of those generals, none of those decision-makers, would ever know the name of the woman who had carried that paper bag. But those who whispered about Valkyrie began to speak louder. Back in the supply room, Anna's eyes refocused. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Thorne's chest tightened. He understood, or at least he began to. "Were you ever afraid?" he asked. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Always. Fear sharpens the edges, but you learn to walk with it, to hide it so deeply that even you begin to forget it's there." Thorne nodded, though he couldn't imagine carrying that weight. His wars had been fought with rifles, with teams at his side, with the roaring power of American machinery at his back. Hers had been fought in silence, in shadows, with nothing but her wits. He wanted to ask more, but she picked up the bottle again, returning it to its place as if the past had closed its door once more. That night Thorne dreamed of snow. He dreamed of walking streets where every corner was a threat, where one wrong glance meant death. And in that dream he felt her presence, calm, steady, invisible. When he woke, sweat clinging to his skin, he realized he was beginning to understand why men spoke of Valkyrie with reverence. The next week, an intelligence seminar was held on base. Analysts briefed operators on emerging threats, cyber infiltration, and the possibility of compromised assets. The room was filled with SEALs, Marines, intelligence officers. At the back, as always, Anna moved quietly with her cart. Thorne caught the glances, younger men watching her, not with dismissal now but with questions in their eyes. Who had she been? What else had she done? The story had spread, but it was incomplete, tantalizing. During a break, one of the younger operators leaned close to Thorne. "Sir, Is it true? She really pulled guys out of East Germany. Thorne didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. But as he glanced toward Anna, who stood by the doorway, hands folded over her mop handle, he saw something unspoken in her eyes. A memory, a shadow, a truth she would never confirm and never deny. Later that evening, she found herself alone in the mess hall. The lights were dim, the tables empty. She sat at the far end, sipping weak coffee, staring at the reflection of herself in the darkened window. Her mind drifted again, carried back to another night. Nicaragua. The air was thick with humidity, radios crackling and the static of dying batteries. She sat in a windowless room, maps spread across the table, cigarette smoke curling in the stale air. Her fingers traced routes through jungles, her ears tuned to the desperate voices on the other end of the line. An ODA team, American Green Berets, pinned down, wounded, surrounded, no extraction plan left. Command had written them off. But she hadn't. Her voice cut through their fear like steel, calm, steady. She fed them coordinates, routes invisible to anyone but her. She shifted assets like a chess master moving pieces no one else could see. She guided them across terrain they didn't believe they could cross. And hour by hour, she pulled them back from the jaws of death. At dawn, exhausted, her hands shaking from the strain, she heard it. The sound of their voices breaking into laughter, disbelief, relief. They had made it. Alive. She stubbed out her cigarette, closed her map, and disappeared into another day of silence. To them she was only a voice, a ghost, a Valkyrie who had carried them from death into life. The memory faded. The coffee was cold in her hand. Anna set the cup down, rose, and left the mess hall. She had long ago accepted that no one would ever know the full measure of what she had done. No parades, no medals, just silence. But as she passed through the quiet corridor, she noticed Thorne standing there, waiting. His posture was different now, shoulders lower, eyes softer. "Ma'am," he said, not a command, not even a question, just acknowledgement. She inclined her head, and for the first time he saw her not as Valkyrie, not as the janitor, but as both, a woman who carried legends in silence. And in that moment, Thorne realized something. Sometimes, the most dangerous warriors were the ones who never fired a shot. Why were the men suddenly quieter when she entered a room? Anna noticed it first in the cafeteria. She had rolled her cart through those swinging doors thousands of times, always met with the same noise, trays clattering, laughter sharp as gunfire, the thunder of young men brimming with energy. But now something different. Conversations dipped when she passed. Eyes tracked her cart as it squeaked along the linoleum. Heads nodded, stiff but respectful. It unsettled her. Respect was never what she sought. Not then, not now. She had spent decades trading glory for anonymity, medals for silence. Yet here it was again, circling her like a shadow she couldn't shake. She pushed the cart forward, kept her eyes down, and pretended not to hear the whispers. Valkyrie. Thorne sat alone near the back, a tray untouched before him. His eyes followed her, not with arrogance this time, not with dismissal, with something heavier. Shame, yes, but also hunger, a hunger to understand. When she passed, he rose, not in a show of deference, not for anyone else. He simply stood, and when she left, he followed. They ended up in the courtyard, where the winter air bit sharp against skin and the sky sagged heavy with clouds. She leaned on her cart, one hand resting lightly on the mop handle, the other tucked into her faded jacket. "You shouldn't follow me like a lost dog," she said softly, not unkindly. Thorne managed a faint, awkward smile. "I'm not following, I'm trying to learn." She turned her gaze on him. Even after all these days, he still felt that weight, like she was seeing more than his face, more than his uniform. Like she was peering through him, measuring not what he was but what he might become. "What is it you think I can teach you?" she asked. He hesitated. The easy answer, tactics, secrets, legends stuck in his throat. That wasn't it, not anymore. "How to see," he admitted finally. Her eyes softened. A flicker of something almost like approval passed across her face. "Most men don't want to see," she said. "They want to win, to command, to be remembered. Seeing requires humility. It requires silence. Do you have silence in you, Lieutenant Commander?" The question hit him harder than any rebuke. Silence. He had spent his entire career filling space with orders, with confidence, with noise. Silence was foreign. Silence was terrifying. "I don't know," he said honestly. "That," she said, "is a start." Over the next weeks, Thorne found himself watching her more closely than he ever had watched a target. He noticed things the others missed. The way she paused to straighten a crooked picture frame on a wall no one cared about. The way her hand lingered briefly over a folded flag displayed in a case, her thumb brushing the glass as though it held a memory. The way she always knew when a young operator was on the edge of breaking, even if he hid it behind bravado. She never lectured, never intruded, but her presence alone became a kind of gravity. One night Thorne stumbled into the gym at 2 a.m., unable to sleep. The weight room was empty, or so he thought. Then he heard the faint squeak of wheels. Anna was there, wiping down benches, her mop propped nearby. "Don't you ever rest?" he asked. Her lips curved in a thin smile. "Don't you?" He laughed, surprised at himself. He hadn't expected her to return the question. He sat on a bench, elbows on his knees. For a long time neither spoke. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the space. Finally, he said, "The men talk about you now, like you're some legend walking among us." She didn't look up from her work. "Legends are lies told to make men brave. Don't believe them too much." "But you—" "I did what needed to be done," she interrupted gently. "That is not the same as being a legend." Her cloth moved in slow circles, polishing steel. "Do you regret it?" he asked after a beat. Her hand paused, just briefly. "Every choice has a cost," she said. "The victories are never clean. You carry the faces of those you couldn't save. And the ones you did save, they never know your name. Regret becomes part of the air you breathe." Her voice trailed off. Thorne waited, but she said no more. For the first time, he realized the weight she carried was not just history. It was grief. Endless, silent grief. Word spread faster than command could contain it. Operators who had once shoved their trays at her in the cafeteria now stopped to pick them up themselves. Some even tried to take her mop, offering to finish her work. She always refused, politely, firmly. "The work keeps me human," she explained once to Thorne when he asked why. But her refusal didn't stop the shift. One by one, young men began greeting her with small nods. Not performative, not exaggerated. Simple, genuine gestures of respect. And each time she answered with the same faint smile, the same quiet acknowledgement. Whispers followed her still, but they were no longer whispers of dismissal. They were whispers of awe. One afternoon, Thorne watched a moment unfold that burned itself into his memory. A new recruit, barely out of training, stormed into the hallway in a rage after a failed drill. He shoved past Anna, muttering curses, not even looking at her. The cart rattled, the mop clattered to the ground. The corridor fell silent. Men froze, eyes darting between the recruit and the old woman. Anna simply bent, picked up the mop and placed it back on the cart. She said nothing. The silence stretched. Then the recruit, face flushed, eyes darting, seemed to realize the weight of every gaze on him. His shoulders sagged. He turned back, voice breaking. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Anna gave him a small nod. No lecture, no rebuke, just acknowledgement. And somehow, that quiet acceptance cut deeper than any shouted correction could have. Later, Thorne pulled the recruit aside. "Do you know who she is?" The young man swallowed. I've heard the stories, sir. I didn't believe them." "Believe them," Thorne said softly. The recruit nodded, eyes wide. From that day on, Thorne noticed he was different, less brash, more attentive. That night, alone in his quarters, Thorne found himself staring at the reflection in the mirror. His uniform was sharp, his trident gleaming, but for the first time he wondered if any of it mattered. What was strength, really? Was it the medals, the salutes, the missions stacked like trophies? Or was it the quiet resilience of a woman who carried her scars in silence and still found the strength to mop floors? The thought unsettled him. It also humbled him. He realized that she had begun to change him, not with commands, not with training, but with presence, with silence, with the weight of what she carried without ever needing to speak it aloud. Days bled into weeks. The bass adjusted to its new rhythm, the unspoken acknowledgement that a living legend walked its halls disguised in a janitor's uniform. But Anna did not change. She kept her cart, kept her mop, kept her silence. Because in the end, that was who she was. Not Valkyrie, not Colonel, not even a janitor. Just Anna. And maybe, Thorne thought as he watched her one evening, that was the greatest lesson of all. What memory was she hiding behind those eyes? Thorne couldn't stop asking himself that question. The more he learned, the more the mystery deepened. Every fragment she offered, East Berlin, Nicaragua, the voice that had saved Hayes's team, only sharpened the edges of a larger shadow. He wanted to know, needed to know, not out of arrogance this time, but out of something heavier, a sense that within her silence lay truths he needed to understand if he was ever to become the kind of leader she was teaching him, quietly, without trying. The answer came not when he asked, but when he simply listened. It was late evening. Rain hammered the metal roof of the motor pool, the storm drowning out the noise of the bass. Anna was there, pushing her cart along the far wall, checking drains for leaks. Thorne had ducked in to escape the storm, carrying a notebook filled with operational notes he no longer cared to read. She worked in silence until her hands brushed a metal toolbox. For a second her fingers froze. She stared at it, not the box itself, but the faded stenciled letters across its lid. S4. An old designation, logistics. Thorne saw it in her eyes, a flicker, a memory tearing open. He said nothing. He didn't move. And then, in a voice softer than the rain, she began to speak. Czechoslovakia. Her cover was a cultural attaché. Neutral, polite, invisible. But her real work was buried beneath the layers, running agent networks, feeding intelligence westward, weaving webs in a city heavy with suspicion. That night the mission was simple in theory. Extract a double agent. A man who had supplied them with information for years but had finally been exposed. If he was captured, everything unraveled. The rendezvous point was a derelict warehouse, the air thick with dust and oil. She waited in the shadows, pistol tucked beneath her coat, ears straining for every sound. He came, limping, bleeding, his eyes wide with terror. "They know," he whispered. And behind him she heard it, the boots, the shouted commands, the soldiers flooding the street. Her plan unraveled in an instant. The exit route was cut off, the safe house compromised. There was only one way out. She grabbed his arm, dragged him through a side door, up a narrow staircase that groaned beneath their weight. Bullets shattered windows. Shouts echoed. She kicked through a door to the roof, the cold air slicing into her lungs. Below them, floodlights swept the alleys. Men shouted. Dogs barked. There was no escape. The man clutched her arm, eyes wild. "Please, don't let them take me alive." Her chest clenched. She had promised him safety, promised him freedom. She had whispered those lies for months, convincing him to risk everything for the West. And now, here they stood. She could hear the soldiers pounding up the stairs. Seconds, that was all she had. She raised her pistol. His eyes widened, not in fear, in relief. "Do it," he whispered. Her hands shook. She had killed before, but never like this. Never someone she had sworn to save. Never someone who had trusted her so completely. The door burst open. Shadows spilled across the roof. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked across the night. He fell. And in the chaos, she vanished into the storm of lights and bullets, her body moving with the cold precision of training, her soul tearing apart with every step. By dawn, the West had its victory. His death ensured the network stayed hidden. Dozens of others lived because of it. But she never forgot his face, the way his eyes had softened at the end, the way relief had looked so much like forgiveness. The memory broke. She was back in the motor pool, rain hammering the roof, her hand still resting on the old toolbox. Her voice was calm, steady, but her eyes glistened. "Not every life can be saved," she said quietly. "Sometimes the best you can give is dignity." Thorne's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to tell her she had done the only thing she could, but the words caught. They would sound hollow. She didn't need absolution. She had carried this weight for decades. He understood then why she chose silence, why she chose a mop and bucket over medals and parades, because the victories she carried weren't clean. They were jagged, bloody, lined with ghosts. She turned, finally meeting his eyes. "You wanted to know what I see when I close mine. That's what I see, always." The words carved into him. For days after, he couldn't shake them. The faces he had seen in his own wars, the brothers he hadn't saved, the civilians caught in crossfire pressed closer. But she carried more, so much more. And yet she still stood, still worked, still lived. That was strength, not medals, not salutes, this. The next morning, Thorne walked into the mess hall and saw her again. She was pushing her cart past rows of tables, ignoring the whispers. This time, he didn't look away. He stood not in shame, not in pity, but in respect. And as he stood, one by one the others followed. Not a word was spoken, no orders given. Dozens of men, America's best, its fiercest, rose silently as the janitor passed. She didn't slow, didn't acknowledge, but for the briefest moment as she turned the corner, Thorne thought he saw the faintest trace of a tear at the corner of her eye. That night alone, Thorne wrote a note in his journal, not an after-action report, not a tactical breakdown, just words raw and unpolished. Strength is not the absence of scars. It is carrying them and still choosing to walk forward. She carries the weight of ghosts and still pushes a mop. He closed the journal, switched off the light, and lay awake, wondering how many more ghosts she carried. And whether, one day, he could carry his own with the same kind of grace. What happens when the drills stop being drills? The answer came on a Tuesday, a day that began like any other, alarms blaring at dawn, boots pounding across the yard, men cursing over bitter coffee. The base hummed with routine, and then, suddenly, it didn't. The first alert hit the comms room just after 900. Anomalies in the server feed, unexplained outages, a scrambled burst of encrypted chatter that didn't match any known signature. Within minutes, the quiet hum of the base tilted into something darker, a pulse of unease threading through every corridor. By 9:30, the alarm screamed. This time, it wasn't a drill. Thorne was already moving, barking orders, his team spilling into the command hub. The screens flickered with red alerts, threat indicators flaring across the grid. Unauthorized signals pinged from inside the perimeter. An intrusion. Real. Chaos surged. Operators shouted, weapons were drawn, doors slammed. And through the storm of motion, Anna stood once again in the corner, mop handle steady in her hands, watching. Thorne saw her. Their eyes met for only a second, and in that second he felt her silence like a hand on his shoulder. "See. Breathe. Wait." He forced himself to pause, to slow, to watch, and in the stillness something clicked. The signals weren't random, they weren't scattered. They were deliberate, too deliberate, a feint, a lure. Someone wanted them moving in the wrong direction. "Hold positions," he shouted, cutting through the chaos. "They're pulling us away from the comms room. Lock it down. No one moves until I say." His men hesitated, then obeyed. Seconds later, a blast shook the far wing of the building. Smoke belched from the hallway, sprinklers hissing to life. Operators flinched, ready to run. But Thorne didn't move. Neither did Anna. He stared at the monitors, tracing the pattern, following the rhythm of the false signals. And then he saw it, the blind spot. A corridor unguarded, overlooked, where the chaos had drawn no one. That's where they were. "Bravo team with me," he snapped. "Cut them off." They moved. The corridor stank of smoke and scorched wiring. Shadows rippled against flashing red lights. Thorne's team swept in, weapons raised, hearts pounding. And there, figures in dark gear, moving with purpose, carrying cases too heavy to be ordinary. Intruders, real, inside the most secure base in America. The fight that followed was fast, brutal. No drawn-out battle, no cinematic heroics, just the sharp violence of trained men colliding in close quarters, boots slamming, rifles cracking, shouts echoing against steel. When it was over, the corridor reeked of gunpowder and sweat. 3 intruders down, 1 alive, restrained, snarling in a language Thorne didn't recognize. The cases recovered explosives, enough to gut the comms hub and blind their operations for weeks. His men exhaled, adrenaline shaking through their veins. Some laughed nervously, others muttered curses. But Thorne didn't smile. He turned, and through the haze of smoke at the far end of the hall, he saw her. On it. She hadn't moved from her post. She hadn't lifted a weapon. She hadn't spoken a word. But she had been there, her silence anchoring him, her eyes reminding him of what mattered. Not arrogance, not noise, not charging headlong. Seeing. And because of that, they were alive. Hours later, the base settled into the aftermath. Debriefings, medical checks, reports already being drafted. Admiral Hayes strode the halls like a storm contained by discipline, his eyes sharp with both fury and relief. But in the quiet between chaos, Thorne found himself back in the library. His notebook lay open before him, but he couldn't write. His mind circled only one thought. He hadn't led that fight alone. He had carried her with him. The door creaked. Anna entered, rolling her cart, moving as if the morning had been nothing more than another shift. She paused when she saw him, her face unreadable. "You saw," she said softly. Thorne nodded. "Because of you." "No," she corrected. "Because you chose to stop talking long enough to listen. The silence was yours. I only reminded you it was there." He swallowed hard. "Still, if you hadn't." She cut him off with a faint shake of her head. "If I hadn't, someone else would have. One day, Lieutenant Commander, you'll learn, no one is irreplaceable, not even Valkyrie." Her words struck him not with sorrow but with truth. He wanted to protest, to insist she was wrong, that legends like her could never be replaced. But the calm in her eyes told him that humility was the point. He closed his notebook, stood, and faced her fully. For the first time he saluted her. Not stiff, not theatrical, just steady. Her lips curved in that faint, almost sad smile. She did not return the salute. She only nodded, then turned back to her cart. The base changed after that day. Whispers grew louder, not just of Valkyrie's past, but of her presence now. Men spoke of the silent nod she gave in the hall as if it were a medal. Young operators copied her stillness during drills, learning to pause, to breathe, to see. Even Admiral Hayes, granite and unyielding, seemed to soften when she passed. And Thorne, the once arrogant rising star, found himself different. He gave fewer speeches, barked fewer orders. His men noticed. His leadership grew sharper, calmer, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. The lesson had sunk deep. Sometimes silence speaks louder than command. One evening, weeks later, Thorne saw her sitting alone outside the mess hall, the last light of day fading across her face. She looked tired, more tired than usual, but there was peace in her eyes. He sat beside her, neither speaking for a long time. The sky deepened to twilight. Finally, he asked, "Do you ever wonder if it was worth it?" She didn't answer at once. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, where the sun bled into night. "Sometimes," she admitted softly. "But worth isn't measured in medals or recognition. It's measured in the lives that quietly go on because of what you gave up." Her words hung there, settling into the silence between them. Thorne nodded slowly. He thought of the men he had led that day, the ones who had walked back into the sunlight because of her, because of the lesson she had given him. He turned to her, his voice steady. "Then I think it was worth it." Her eyes flickered toward him, and for the first time he saw not just the legend, not just the janitor, but the woman. Worn, human, carrying ghosts but still here. And that, he realized, was the truest strength of all. Why do legends always leave in silence? That was the thought that lingered in Thorne's mind as the weeks slipped into months. The base had changed, in ways subtle, in ways profound. The men still trained with the same fire, still carried themselves with the same edge, but something deeper ran beneath it now. A stillness, a patience, a respect for the unseen. And at the center of it all, there was her. Anna, the janitor, Valkyrie, Colonel analyzed Schmidt. She moved through the halls as she always had, cart squeaking, mop handle steady in her hands. But now, every man who passed her slowed, nodded, acknowledged. Not out of performance, out of reverence. Even the youngest recruits, who had never seen her legends whispered in classified files, straightened their shoulders when she approached. She did not seek it. She did not revel in it. She carried it with the same quiet dignity with which she had carried everything in her life. But change has a way of running its course. It was early morning when Thorne found her standing at the edge of the courtyard, the sunrise spilling gold across the concrete. Her cart was parked beside her, but her hands rested lightly on the handle, as though it were no longer an anchor but a farewell. "Leaving?" he asked quietly. She didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed on the horizon. "It's time." The words landed heavier than he expected. Time. For what? For where? He wanted to ask, but something in her posture told him the answers didn't belong to him. "Why now?" She breathed deeply, the cool air fogging with her exhale. "Because I've given what I can. The rest is yours." He swallowed hard. "We still need you." At that she turned. Her eyes, though softened by age, pierced him the way they had that first day in the command hub. "No, Lieutenant Commander, you needed to learn, and you have." The truth stung, not because it belittled him, but because it was undeniable. He had changed, not through drills or victories, but through her presence, her silence, her ghosts. "You'll lead them better now," she said. "Not because of me, because you've learned to see." His chest tightened. For a long moment he couldn't speak. Then, voice low, he said, "If I live long enough, I'll spend the rest of my career trying to live up to what you've shown me." A faint smile touched her lips. Then perhaps it was worth it. Word spread quietly, as it always did, that she was gone. One morning she was there, pushing her cart. The next, her uniform was folded neatly on a chair in the supply room, her ID badge placed on top. No ceremony, no farewell. She had disappeared the way she had lived, silent, invisible. And yet her absence echoed louder than her presence ever had. In the days that followed, the base seemed emptier. The cart no longer squeaked down the halls. The faint scent of bleach no longer lingered near the command hub, but her lessons remained. Operators carried themselves differently now, not just with fire but with awareness. They saw the details they once overlooked: a loose wire, a crooked frame, the quiet despair in a teammate's eyes. They had learned to see. Thorne most of all. It was weeks later when Admiral Hayes found him in the library, notebook open, pen unmoving. "She's gone," Hayes said softly. Thorne nodded. "She left without a word." The Admiral's eyes softened. "It's what she does. She appears when needed, vanishes when it's time. She's done it her whole life." Thorne looked up. "Do you think we'll ever see her again?" Hayes was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Men like us don't decide that. Legends choose their own exits. And yet even gone she remained. Thorne saw her in the stillness before a briefing, when silence spoke louder than strategy. He heard her in the hesitation before barking an order, when patience revealed truths arrogance would have missed. He carried her in every ghost of humility that tempered his command. One night he returned to the library alone. The shelves stood silent, the air heavy with the weight of history. He sat at the long oak table, the same one she had polished 100 times. His hand rested on its surface, tracing the faint grooves worn by her rag. And he whispered to no one and to her all at once, "Thank you." The words vanished into the silence, but he knew she would have heard them, somehow, somewhere. Years later, when men spoke of Thorne, the missions he led, the lives he saved, some called him brilliant, others ruthless, others patient. None could agree on what defined him. But those who had served under him, who had stood with him in fire and silence alike, said the same thing. He learned from someone you'll never read about in a book, someone you probably walked past without noticing. And they were right. Because sometimes, the greatest teachers are the ones the world never names. Sometimes, the truest heroes are the ones who leave no trace. In the end, her story was never about medals or glory. It was about dignity, about carrying ghosts with grace, about teaching others not with commands but with silence. And so her legacy lived on, not in files, not in parades, but in the quiet resilience of those who had learned to see because of her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And then quietly it walks away.